Welcome to your sleep story, friend. I'm honored to be the voice you hear before you go to sleep tonight. I'm starting a new series called Night Stories, in which we examine people and their lives from a more narrative perspective. I tell the story in my typical drowsy manner, but it's more like an audiobook reading, and you follow the journey of a specific character. In this episode, we begin with a Japanese banker named Naoki, who leaves his city life in Tokyo to live a much more tranquil existence. And we follow during that journey. I would like to know a little bit more about you. Where are you in the world? And what time is it? Please let me know in the comments. All right, let's begin the relaxation session, which will last until the video is 10 minutes long. I'll count down from 10 to 1. And as I do, let yourself relax and let go more and more. Feel the support of the bed beneath you, the floor, or whatever you're lying on. Tonight, watch to see if you can recognize a deeper, ongoing support, the earth's support as our home beneath everything. Then let that knowledge help you let go, release, and start saying goodbye to Thay. And if you haven't closed your eyes yet, perhaps now would be a good time to let them shut. You're secure. Tonight, let my voice be your friend and a source of compassion, a source you can rely on to always lead you to safe places in this narrative or another. First, you're getting more conscious of that sense of security. See if it helps you let go. 8. After the day is over, you're likely still thinking about what has happened and what will happen. Head in your head, and rather than pursuing them, try to just watch them go. Don't battle them. Instead, watch them drift away like leaves on a moonlit river or clouds moving over a starry sky. 7. This is your moment. You deserve it. Allow yourself to relax and enjoy this moment. Recognize that everyone deserves to sleep. Pay attention to your body and where you could be holding tension, whether it's in your lower legs, feet, or somewhere else entirely, belly, your hands, or perhaps you're like me and you keep the stress in your face. Just let it all go. I can assure you that you have 6 pockets of inner peace, and you can discover them tonight. Just start letting go now and see if you can find that inner peace as you get closer and closer to deep sleep. Realize that you have nothing to carry, nowhere to go, and nothing to do. Then let that truth bring about how you want to be perceived, heard, and felt. Give yourself extra rest. 4. Maybe start by being thankful for the small things in life, like your shelter tonight, your breath, and the people you care about. Then, 3. Start interacting with using your imagination. Picture a rainy Tokyo night, a bus passing through it, and the comfortable nighttime travel atmosphere of the bus. You're far from everything you know, and you're checking in with your body again. Your body has worked hard today. It's time to relax. As I tell you tonight's sleep story. Tokyo was a blur of light and rain, with neon signs blinking through the mist. Sleep story, like quiet thoughts trying to reach the surface. Umbrellas swayed in unison along Shinjuku Station, overlapping like a sea of petals under the downpour. The city moved with its usual urgency, marked by the distant screech of taxis. A train hummed overhead. A voice spoke in a practiced monotone over a loudspeaker. But Naoki remained motionless. He tightened the strap of his bag and adjusted it to the collar of his coat, and his black umbrella tilted slightly in the wind, allowing droplets to slide down its edge in tiny, shimmering trails. He was soaked at the cuffs, and his glasses had slightly fogged. But he didn't mind, because this would be the last rainy Tokyo night he would see for a long time. When the night bus to Kagoshima arrived at the station, the first leg of his journey southward, the driver stepped down with a calm smile and bowed once before ushering the passengers aboard. When Naoki stepped onto the bus, the interior was instantly warmer, dimmer, and the soundscape softened. There were no train announcements or horns, only the quiet hum of the engine and the gentle rustle of coats and bags being settled. The overhead lights were like paper lanterns, adding a quiet warmth to the cabin. He found a seat near the back by the window, and, as a small favor, he carefully folded his coat over his lap and placed his small suitcase under his seat. A few books, a worn journal, and a single postcard featuring a watercolor painting of Okinawa's coastline, cliffs, turquoise sea, and small houses nestled into the hills like secrets were in its front pocket. He leaned his head against the cool windowpane outside the city lights, which were blurred by the rain. And then, for the first time in months, he relaxed without worrying about deadlines. The truth felt too sacred to explain, so he wasn't running. Instead, he was leaving his job 3 days ago, slipping his resignation letter into his manager's inbox before the sun had even risen. He hadn't shared his plan with anyone but a few close friends, and even then, he vaguely said, "I need a break. I'm going south for a while. Maybe I'll start something small." No more marble lobbies, elevator pitches, and endless financial forecasts. Unplugging from Tokyo, from anticipation, from the version of himself that had always known the answer but had never asked the question. A soft chime announced departure. The bus glided through the quiet streets, rain tapping a soft rhythm on the roof and blending into the rest of the passengers' soft breathing. Naoki turned his face toward the window he passed, familiar. The quiet cafe where he used to sit late at night with a cup of matcha and a spreadsheet was illuminated by an old bookstore and a convenience store that had always left its lantern lit. Everything appeared a little softer and kinder in the rain. He reached into his coat pocket and took out a small packet of sakura-scented hand wipes, a parting gift from a coworker who had once said, "When you go, take the peaceful version of Tokyo." With a small smile, Naoki unwrapped the packet and carefully placed it in the side pouch of his luggage. He didn't need much for this trip. All he needed was the peace of the road and the belief that, like a seed broken open in the dark, there was a life waiting for him. The engine hummed. The light dimmed slightly. The rain whispered along the windows, and the night bus continued to roll him out of the city and into the warmth of something new. Naoki wasn't sure how many hours had gone by, however, as the night stretched and folded in on itself in a gentle, uninterrupted manner. Drift. The bus had left Tokyo far behind, trading towers for shadows, neon for silence, and now they were following the sea's edge, which was only seen through the window as a dark, reflective sheet in the gentle glow of the rain and moonlight. The road curled next to it like a lazy river, hugging the coastline on one side, while the mountains remained motionless on the other. Vast, while the ocean was serene and boundless. The rain had subsided to a light mist, and Naoki sat motionless, watching the roadside lamps go by one, like measured breaths. The bus company had given him a soft wool blanket, and he was now wrapped in it. A small compartment above the seats had been marked for comfort, and when he had opened it earlier, he had discovered not only a blanket, a lavender-scented eye mask, and a small bottle of warm barley tea were among the details that caught his attention. The nutty warmth of the tea settled in his chest as he sipped it slowly. A few seats ahead, someone was humming softly, but across the aisle, an elderly woman with silver streaks had fallen asleep with a book resting gently on her chest. Naoki looked at the title, Okinawa, Islands of Quiet. Strength, he looked out the window once more, and somewhere beyond that water was where he was going. Okinawa. He knew only tidbits about it, stories he had collected in his pocket like stones, and you knew it was warm all year round, kissed by sea breezes, and the smell of salt and hibiscus that the locals believed in Yui Maru. The profound sense of Quinta's unsense. Connection, and he didn't know exactly where he would live. But he had seen a listing for a wooden house near the sea with old floorboards and a small yard, and he imagined it now, supporting one another. He had read that the elders there lived longer than anywhere else, not because they were perfect, but because they were slow, rhythmic, and joyful during evening tables and in gardens. He hadn't played music in years, but recently he had been considering learning the sanhin, the Okinawan three-strung instrument, something simple with the music soul, a bookshelf by the window, a kettle that was always ready, a small table for guests, or perhaps for no one at all. All of this was perfect, but soft. A gentle crinkling sound broke the silence. With a slow, knowing smile, the elderly woman, whose eyes were now gentle behind her glasses, reached into her cloth bag and took out a pair of small bright music tangerines that still had a leaf attached, held one out to him. Without saying anything, Naoki blinked and then accepted it with a slight bow of gratitude. She smiled again and spoke softly. "They're sweeter in the south." He nodded, but said nothing more. They sat in pleasant silence as he slowly peeled the tangerine, the citrus scent rising like sunlight. The flesh was soft, the flavor bright, and yes, perhaps even sweeter than any he remembered. Naoki leaned back again. The coastal road continued winding. The sea continued to breathe, and the warmth of the Nightbus enveloped him like a blanket you don't know you need until it's wrapped around your shoulders. As the night grew darker outside, the coastal lights had faded to nearly nothing, and the last fishing village was long behind them. Now, only the gentle murmur of trees and the bus appeared to float through the darkness, a silent vessel transporting sleeping souls toward the edge of morning, while the sea followed the winding road. Naoki pulled the blanket higher up to his chest, the tangerine peel still resting in a folded paper napkin on his tray, its sweetness lingering in his mouth, and its brightness somehow echoing. In Hishist, the barley tea's warmth had music subsided, but the comfort remained. There was mist on the windows and the steady hum of tires gliding over wet roads. Naoki's eyelids became heavy. His breath deepened, and he soon gave himself up to sleep. The dream came softly, and he was a boy again. Perhaps 10 or 11 he was, running barefoot along the stone edge of a riverbank near his childhood home. The sun was shining on his arms, and his legs were soaked up to the knees from chasing minnows in the shallows. A bamboo flute was lying in the grass nearby, and he picked it up and played a few off-key notes that made him laugh in a way that was unguarded and free. There was laughter he hadn't experienced in years, and he wasn't trying to earn a moment of rest or chase time here. The dream changed, and he found himself standing on the edge of a cliff with a view of the sea. The water below was a brilliant turquoise, and the sky was soft with morning. In front of him was a small wooden house that had weathered beautifully, with white curtains dancing in the light dot as he entered the threshold. He knew without understanding how that this was his place, not owned, not conquered, but belonging with. open windows, bookcases, light wood porcelain teacups arranged in a row. A lone desk with a worn cushion, and a kettle simmering softly in the corner. His breath slowed as his hand touched the spine of a book with faded Japanese script. Outside the window, he noticed people strolling along a beach path, including a child laughing, a man with a fishing pole, a woman carrying a bunch of freshly picked herbs, and someone passing him a steaming bowl of rice and pickled vegetables. No one asked him who he was, but they simply grinned and said, "You're just in time." Fourth dream subsided once more, and he found himself sitting at a low table under paper lanterns at night. A few neighbors were gathered around someone who was strumming a sunshin, a delicate three-stringed melody that filtered through the sound of chopsticks and laughter. Naoki held a teacup in both hands, and the warmth of it kept him steady as the edges of the dream faded into the gray light of early dawn. The world was still shrouded in a sleepy silence. He looked up at the night sky, which was full of stars, close and bright, and he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not excitement or pride, just ease. He woke slowly, eyelids fluttering. Naoki sat motionless for a long time, unsure of the origin of the dream, whether it was memory, imagination, or something that had been waiting for him, while the elderly woman next to him had gone back to her book, and someone had gently cuffed toward the front. The ocean was still pale and now touched by the first light of the morning. Naoki felt the weight of who he had been and who he was becoming begin to settle as the road continued south, winding toward Kagashima and the sea beyond. But something inside him had changed, as if permission had been given to start over and arrive somewhere new, to be someone softer. When the bus coasted into Kagoshima, the rain had subsided into a fine mist. It was still early, just after 6, and the city was still waking up. The streets were silent, the air heavy with sea salt and steam from the nearby hot springs. And Sakurima, the active volcano, loomed in the distance behind a veil of clouds, its shape ghostly against the pale morning sky. Naoki got off the bus after the driver made a brief announcement about a short rest stop before the ferry Tanaha left in the afternoon. He stretched his limbs and listened to music as he did so. The humid air carried the scent of wet earth morning dew and the subtle sweetness of freshly baked bread. He pulled his coat tighter around himself, but it wasn't found a bench near the waterfront that was protected from the camera as he walked slowly, allowing the quiet of Kagoshima to envelop him like the morning mist. The city was sleepy and somehow comforting, a port town that was constantly half in motion. We're starting to blink off one by one, He closed his eyes for a moment as the weight of the journey so far settled in his shoulders. The tree's wide branches were still gently dripping with rain, and a group of workers nearby were loading crates onto a small delivery boat. Birds talked languidly overhead, and a vending machine behind him sang a little tune while it dispensed. A can of hot tea. How long had it been since he had sat motionless like this, with no expectations pressing against his skin? He took his journal out of his bag and turned to a blank page, looking at it for a moment before writing in small, steady handwriting. I think it's the beginning of healing, because there is a kind of stillness I have never known before, he underlined the word healing once, then folded the journal closed. As he stood there, he saw an elderly man sitting on a folding stool nearby, his hat tipped low, smoking a pipe and observing the boats. Their eyes briefly met, and the man nodded slightly. First time to Okano, he said in a gravelly soft but courteous voice, and the man grinned and tapped ash into Uten said, "It's not just a place, it's a different way of living." "I've heard that," Naoki said. "I'm going to start a quieter life there. That's the hope, anyway." The man thought about this for a while before responding. "The sea doesn't rush, neither should we." Naoki smiled faintly, and there was a silence between them that didn't need to be filled. In a quiet farewell, they nodded once more, and Naoki turned back toward the ferry terminal. Inside, there were soft announcements and gentle echoes. He picked up his ticket, sat by the window, and sipped the hot tea he had purchased from the ferry. The man, breathing, finally said, "The ferry is long but peaceful. Sit on the upper deck. If the weather holds, you'll see flying fish. I will." The ferry's white hull was waiting outside, rising steadily in the harbor. Naoki watched as it rocked gently against the pier, the ropes holding it in place like a sleeping creature trying to wake up. The sky had lightened to a soft pearl gray, and a few rays of sun peeked through the clouds like hope through a broken door. But his heart was at peace. Kagoshima's final rooftops dwindled behind them, fading into mist and memory as the ferry. Okinawa eased away from the dock with a low moan and a burst of white foam, slipping gently into the open sea. Naoki stood on the upper deck, his coat zipped to the neck, the breeze tugging softly at his sleeves. He leaned on the rail as the vast, endless ocean stretched out in front of him. It wasn't stormy this time, just calm, endless, gray, and gentle. Waves that resemble long exhalations rising and falling with the slow breath of the earth. The ferry's motion wasn't unnerving. Rather, it was grounding, rocking slightly, and he was free to sway with it. He had brought a small book with him, an anthology of Okano and folk tales, But he hadn't opened it yet because the sea was already full of stories. A voice from the ferry steward behind him acknowledged him quietly and pointed out the snack bar below, which had rice bowls, hot soup, and though who wasn't hungry yet, he nodded in appreciation for the jasmine tea. For the time being, all he wanted to do was gaze up at the clouds rolling in gentle stacks, which were dense and moving slowly. The air had changed from Tokyo's edge of winter crispness to something warmer, humid, and almost pleasant, which he had taken in thoroughly salt and a hint of hibiscus from a far offshore. He recalled something he had read about Okinawa. They don't chase time. Instead, they stroll alongside it like old friends. He took out his phone and opened a picture he had saved about a small wooden house with white shutters, with laundry softly dancing on a line in the background. It was a rental listing he had seen months prior, but he wasn't sure if it was still accessible. But it had triggered something inside of him, not ambition, but a desire for peace and quiet, sun-warmed wood beneath his feet, and a lack of loneliness. Below, a child exclaimed, and then a mother's high voice gently reminded him to exercise caution. Naoki grinned to himself as the decks swayed once more. But at the bow, a small group of flying fish erupted from the water's surface. A flash of silver above the water, like stars skipping across the sea. He followed their path with his eyes until they disappeared, and the music was just violent enough to remind him of the movement, the crossing, and how far he'd come. He believed that everything was gently sitting at a seat near a window below deck. He opened the sky, the sea, and somewhere inside himself, the tea was hot and aromatic. The miso soup was simple, and as he ate slowly, he thought about the emails he no longer had to respond and the folded suits. He was keeping them neatly at the bottom of his suitcase, not because he needed them, but because he wasn't sure what to do with them yet. The city he had left the expectations in, he had peeled away one by one like heavy layers. And he thought of Okinawa, which was still ahead, but close now, a place with its own pace, seasons, and music, but not precisely. He only knew what he would no longer do, and that was sufficient. The ferry rocked softly as the announcement was played over the speaker. A derive at Naha in 30 minutes. Please prepare your belongings. Naoki gathered his bag, and the window next to him was foggy with sea mist. Beyond it, he could just make out, he thought, I want to live gently like this place, as he looked at the shoreline, green hills, red-roofed houses, and the silver curve of a calm beach. The ferry touched the dock and exhaled slowly, pulling ropes toward the engine, which quieted like a sigh at the conclusion of a lengthy sentence. The sky over Naha was white and broad with light cloud cover. The rain had long since stopped, but its freshness was still present in the air. The sun was starting to return, filtered through moisture like gold behind rice paper. And Noak stepped out with his bag slung over one shoulder, the salty wind already rubbing against his face, warmer than he had anticipated and softer. He stopped at the pier's edge with his suitcase in hand and allowed the music to drop. The ground felt different here, not just softer or drier, but slower, as if the ground's rhythm had changed. Birds were calling from somewhere in the palm trees. The cat was stretched out on a crate next to a closed fruit stand, and a line of mopeds was humming, moving without hurry or urgency, past their drivers in flip-flops and printed shirts. Naoki grinned at nothing in particular, but because his body seemed to grasp something that his mind was still processing, he had arrived. He passed wooden signs painted in cheery blues, and the streets of Naha were narrow and shaded with a mural of sea turtles on a concrete wall. Bougainvillea spilling over the balconies, a grandmother sweeping leaves from her storefront, and buildings low and wide painted in sun-washed hues. Reds were seen outside, and a group of taxis waited, their drivers chatting with each other under parasols. He gave one of them the name of the guest house, and soon he was gliding through the colorful streets of Naha. The guest house, a modest, two-story home with white shutters, a tiled roof, and ivy curling around its fence. The owner, a woman named Sori's son, in her early 60s, met him at the gate with a quiet nod and a smile. The tones were faded pinks, yellows, turquoise, and Naoki watched it all pass like pages in a picture book. "You must be exhausted," she replied, with a smile as she ushered him inside, asking if he would prefer tea or sleep first. He chuckled quietly. Tea would be ideal inside. The air had a tatami and citrus scent. The floor groaned reassuringly, as if it were welcoming his footfall. And the living area was simply woven mats, low cushions, a small table with a ceramic vase of wild flowers, and through the open windows, a gentle breeze carried in the sound of distant waves. She brought him a cup of jasmine tea and a small plate of mochi. The tea was clean and floral, making it the ideal contrast to the sea air. He wrapped his hands around the warm cup and felt the last of the journey's tension melt away as they conversed. She smiled and remarked, "Many people come to Okinawa for rest. Some of them stay longer than they music planned without asking. Too many questions about his background or what he wanted to find here." After she finished his tea, he realized that she had shown him his room. A tiny upstairs room with a low bed, white curtains, and a bamboo chair by the he could only make out a thin strip of blue between the rooftops in the ocean from the balcony. But it was enough to know he would soon be at the shore. He unpacked slowly, not just of belongings, but also of feelings, placing his books on the low shelf, each one a thread of memory, and his journal on the windowsill, which caught the light as though it had discovered its spot as night fell. Naoki strolled to the beach, where the sand was smooth and pale under his shoes. He removed them, and the water kissed his feet with a softness he had never experienced before, one that was invitational rather than judgmental. There were no ringing phones or loud voices, only the sea, the breeze, and his own breath. For the first time in a long time, Naoki lay motionless beneath a light cotton sheet. He didn't stay long enough to know that tomorrow he would swim, rest, and start. The sunlight came in subtly and without much fanfare, slipping between the white curtains, warming the bamboo floors, and brushing against the side of his face. Had no alarm, no meetings, no commitments shaped by urgency, only the gentle symphony of birds calling from tiled rooftops, a neighbor raking leaves along the sidewalk, the low hum of someone riding by on an ancient silver bike, and the slow rise of the Naoki, encased in the tranquility of the guest house with a faint clinking from thesaurus. Sun was making breakfast for someone in the kitchen below, judging by the rustle of plates, the low whistle of a kettle, and the simple linen shirt and swim shorts he changed into. He put a small towel under his arm and stepped out into the golden morning, where the air was warm but not stuffy like the first page of a book. He went barefoot down the path that led to the beach, and the street smelled of salt and dot, the shore. The sand was still cool, kissed by the retreating tide, and a white dog slept under the shade of a potted plant. Someone had hung wind chimes in a window, and they played slowly in the breeze like distant piano keys, scattered and slow. Naoki stood for a moment, allowing the sight to hold him. The water was calm and clear, a color so gentle it felt almost unbelievably. Pale fish darted close to the surface, and the horizon was endlessly stitched to the sky with light. He entered the sea, first at his ankles, then at his knees, and finally at his waist. The water welcomed him warm and silky, and he floated almost motionless, with the sky above him being soft and endless, and the water cradling him like a lullaby without for lunch. He discovered a market shop that sold goye champuru, a regional dish of bitter melon stir-fried with tofu and pineapple juice. The juice was bright and tangy, and the ice clinked softly as it melted. He closed his eyes and let go later, sitting on a shaded bench by the beach and sipping pineapple juice from a tall glass given to him by a smiling vendor in a red cup. If you eat Goya often, you'll never age, the woman who handed him the egg said softly, her eyes friendly and her voice reminiscent of Labis. He grinned and believed her when she said that the taste was earthy and powerful, unlike anything he was accustomed to. Yet it gave him a sense of presence and groundedness, as though he was already on the island, albeit in a tiny way. He wandered aimlessly through the narrow, shaded streets that were lined with pottery shops, quiet temples, and small gardens that overflowed the stone walls. He passed a bookstore in a quiet corner, its doorway hung with a faded blue curtain, and inside were wooden shelves, stacks of old magazines, and a cat curled up under the counter. He spent almost an hour there, leafing through the pages. He bought the book with exact change after finding a thin, hand-stitched book on Okinawan tea rituals. The woman behind the counter wrapped it in tissue paper and tied it with twine. There was no barcode or receipt, just a bow and a smile that said, "You're welcome to return anytime." He went back to the guest house as the light started to fade, and he spent some time sitting on the balcony with a new book in his lap while looking out over the rooftops that glittered in the late afternoon sun. Naoki drank the same kind of jasmine tea that Sori's son had given him when he first arrived, and for a while he just breathed, didn't check the time, and didn't make any plans. As evening approached slowly, as if the island itself didn't want to let go of the light, the air grew colder. The sky tinted with soft pastels, dusty pinks, streaks of lavender, and a golden haze brushed the tops. There was no guilt ahead. We were just existing. He felt the air in his lungs, the slow melt of sunlight, and the knowledge that all that was expected of him was to be here. The world wasn't in a rush, and for the first time in a long time, neither was Naoki, who stood barefoot on the balcony of his guest house as lamps on the rooftops flickered on one by one, creating warm pools of light on the sidewalks and crickets singing from secret spots in the garden. I've arrived not just in a location, but in myself. He sat down, pulled a notebook into his lap, and started writing. The notebook opened to a new page. A pen was waiting across it, and beside it was a thin ceramic cup with jasmine tea steam curling softly upward into the twilight. Quietly, something is growing, not ambition, not urgency, simply belonging. He closed the notebook, and the shop's concept had come back not as a plan, but as a whisperer, small wooden cottage by the ocean, with books on every page. He could see it, he could feel it, not as something to chase, but as something that was already waiting for him to arrive. He would call it E, meaning days, or the quiet, as he saw the shelf and teapots warming on low burners. People entering from the heat or the rain, welcomed by a wind chime, and the gentle aroma of roasted barley. Rhythm of everyday life. It would only need to be genuine, serene, and a place where people could sit and feel their shoulders drop later. As night fell, he took one last stroll back down to the beach where the moon had risen and cast a silver glow over the water. The sand had grown cool and the tide had risen. The sound of the waves was softer and slower than before. He moved closer to the coast and let the surf wash over his toes without thinking about where he had been or what would happen next. He closed his eyes and allowed the breeze to flow through him like a melody. He opened them again to see a child running down the beach ahead of their mother, laughing, small feet kicking up soft plumes of sand, arms outstretched like wings, and a quiet fullness rising in his chest as he recalled his previous life in Tokyo. The schedules, constraints, and the constant noise he paid attention to. He didn't miss it in this instance, though. The old woman with the Sori's jasmine and the man on the ferry. Tangerines, their voices were now inside of him. Kindness in small doses. Soft signals along the He took a final turn toward the water. Let the night hold and his breath. Music slowed down him. And while he stood, his feet were buried in sand, heart exposed to the sky. A basic like a shell sitting in his head. A thought softly. On the beach, I don't have to hurry to become anything that I have already started.